All right, everybody. I've got everyone on mute. So if you can't hear me, I am talking. Type into the chat and we'll try to do some technical troubleshooting. If everything is okay, I'm just going to get started. Few people are here already, not everybody, but I'm sure they'll trickle in as time goes on. So, welcome everybody to how to use play and games to engage students in an instructional webinar. I am so excited about today. This is the first time I have delivered this particular topic. It's very timely. For COVID-19, lots of instructors are delivering their classes online, so I thought it was an excellent time for me to share some of the games and techniques that I've developed for online delivery. So this is brought to you by the Workplace Culture Store. And just quickly go over what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over some basic stuff about how to deliver instruction online. This stuff is readily available online, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. I'm also going to share some of the easiest techniques for engaging students online. This is stuff that you can watch today and use tomorrow. We're going to look at how online and in-classroom instruction differ and how to take advantage of that for the betterment of your instruction and your students. And we're going to basically look at a snippet of a one-day learning program for instructors by Workplace Culture Store. It provides an actual experiential and experimental look at using play and games in the adult classroom, whether it's online or in classroom. We're also going to look at a brief overview of other content in that program in case that interests you. So, just to go over the basic stuff, as I said, advice is readily available out there. You just have to Google how do I deliver instruction online, and these are the basics. Make sure that you're using a delivery platform that you know and trust. I use Zoom, and I trusted it until recently when I found out that it's being hacked now and then. So I've actually heard that the government of Canada is phasing out the use of Zoom for that reason. So it's something that you might want to consider. Also remove distraction for you and the students. So basically you create a studio/classroom in your home with a microphone. I actually have a professional microphone right here. I'm going to show that to you later. Know how to use your face, your voice, your body in instruction. And in this case, it'll be mostly your face and your voice because you're looking directly into the webcam. Now, most of you as instructors will already know how to do that. But what happens with online is that they see less of you, but more of that less of you. Does that make sense? Also, wear rich, solid colors, nothing that will create any distraction. And then the standard rules with kids, alarms, phones, and dogs. And it's a good idea to enlist a friend. And in this case, my bestie Hillary is on the line. Hello, Hillary. I can see you in the list there, so I know you're here. Thanks for joining. And Hillary is going to take over if something technical goes wrong. And I've made her the host if she needs to do that. So, oh, and this is probably the most important one. Don't use all the techniques that I show you today in any one session. With playing games, especially online, less is more. What happens if you use too many in one session, it kind of becomes distracting, becomes like a three-ring circus. So avoid that. All right, basic stuff out of the way. This is me. I have been teaching in the executive classroom for 20 years. I started Workplace Culture Store last year, which is an online store. We provide games, tools, and instruction for learning and using play and games to a business advantage. Now, the reason I had those words fade out really quickly is to remind me not to talk about any one topic for too long. And in this case, it was myself. I think it's a good idea not to talk about yourself too long. So I put these little reminders in my slides. The Workplace Culture Store provides services in these six streams: learning and development, leadership, culture. No, don't go away yet, I'm not done. Mental health and wellness, creativity and innovation, and charitable giving. And those 6 streams actually fit together very nicely. They really intertwine beautifully. And if you look at my website, you can see how that's done. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple stories about how this whole thing came to be. I started using play and games in my classroom in 2010 with 2 sessions. I'm going to tell you about those, and I'm going to stop sharing the slides and you'll just get to see my video. Hello, everybody. Oh, one other thing I should mention, actually, is when you set up your studio in your classroom in your home, it's a good idea to stand while you do instruction. And the reason for that is that standing puts you in an instructional frame of mind. When you're sitting, you don't feel so much like a teacher. And that's why I stand while I'm delivering webinars. And it might feel awkward at first to be standing in your living room or your dining room delivering to your computer, but you'll see what a big difference it makes in terms of how you feel and how you project and how your voice works. So I'm going to tell you those 2 stories about how this whole thing came to be. In 2010, I had started doing executive classroom training for the engineering firm that I was working for. And they asked me to teach about proposal management and other business development topics. One of those was interviewing a client. And I noticed that a lot of the seller doers that I was working with didn't seem to get a lot out of being lectured on a topic like that. And I thought, well, what if they could see one of these business development mavens in action? What if they could be a fly on the wall and actually see it? So I thought, okay, we can't take them to the meeting with us, but what we can do is we can act out that meeting in a training. So I enlisted one of the mavens, one of the seller doers that was really excellent at interviewing a client. And I said, let's act out that interview that we did last week with the city. And let's show them exactly the techniques we used, those open-ended questions and all those things we did to get them talking, and to get them sharing their issues about the project. And we ended up doing that. And at the end of that session, many of the people actually had, in fact, one of the guys had tears in his eyes because nobody had ever done it that way. Nobody had ever delivered instruction to them in a way that they could actually see and feel and experience for themselves. And then right around that time, I also had a dream. Some would call it a nightmare. It's kind of funny. I dreamt that I got an RFP that was asking for proposals in the form of a cake. And the RFP said that every evaluator on the evaluation team wanted a different kind of cake. And I thought, well, how am I supposed to make a cake, a proposal cake, that will fit everybody's taste? And I woke up in a sweat. And then that morning, as I was driving to work, I thought, you know, this actually might be a funny way to deliver proposal training. So I had proposal training coming up in a couple of weeks. And they came into the room, and on the table, I had flour, and I had mixing bowls, and I had eggs, and I had milk, and baking powder, and all the ingredients that you might use in a typical cake. And what I did is I gave them an RFP, just like the one I'd seen in my dream. And the RFP was asking for a proposal in the form of a cake. What this training allowed me to explore was how people in an adult classroom would receive a metaphor like that, and how it would help them to download, basically, the ideas that I was trying to express about developing a proposal that would reach each one of those evaluators, and one that would cater to their tastes, and one that would seem new and exciting to them. So they went through the process of mixing the cakes. They had different roles on the teams. One person would prepare the recipe. One person would bring together the ingredients. One person would handle the baking. And it was an excellent way to experience the idea of working together for a proposal. It was in a compressed time frame. And it was so successful that I realized, okay, there's something more at play here. I have these 2 sessions that went really amazingly well, and I got really great feedback. And from then on, I realized I'm going to explore this. And I discovered that what I had done in those 2 sessions was I had played with them. I had created a playful experience that allowed them to explore the subject matters. And that's when I launched my 8-year-long journey of researching play and how it works in the adult brain, particularly in instruction and in the workplace. So just going to go back to our slides here. Just bear with me for a moment. All right. So before we go further, I'm going to share 2 more quick little stories about what's been going on lately and the reason that delivering instruction online has become more prevalent and more important these days, and that is because of COVID-19, of course. This picture that you see here happened recently in Ottawa. These signs, this park and its amenities are closed, are all over the city of Ottawa and the parks. Now that silhouette figure you see there dancing like John Cleese, that actually wasn't on the original sign. Some playful fellow was walking through the park and decided to replace the artwork with that silhouette of John Cleese. And it went viral. And this is just one of those examples of how play becomes more important even during a crisis. And these silly little things that don't seem to mean a lot in isolation, when you put them all together, they really paint a picture of how humanity is surviving one of the hardest things we've been through in the last 100 years or so. And another one, this jolly old elf is Premier Doug Ford. And he recently did something very playful and surprised us all. He went on TV completely straight-faced and put out a decree that the Easter Bunny was considered an essential service. He did this the week before Easter. And I wasn't terribly fond of him before this moment, but when he did this, I realized, that guy has a little bit of play in him. And it kind of really brought COVID-19 into perspective for me. And I realized that some things are essential to survival. Things like social distancing and sanitary conditions, and making sure that we keep our distance in the grocery store, making sure that we flatten the curve on this whole thing. But I also realized some things are essential to life. And these are the things that we're surviving for. Things like laughter, things like an actual government decree that the Easter Bunny is essential service, things like joy and beauty and music and all the things that we love about being human, all the things that we play. And it really brought this whole thing into perspective, because I'm one of those employees that's actually considered non-essential. And I kind of took that personal for a while. Then I realized we're not so much non-essential to life itself. We're only non-essential to survival. And that's really what brought this out, this whole idea that I could help people to bring play into their everyday life during COVID and then beyond. Now, I told you a minute ago that I had done 8 years of research into the use of play and games in adult instruction and in the workplace. So through that research, the interviews that I conducted and the people that I talked to and the experiments that I did, I discovered 15 basic types of play. I'm not going to go through each of these one at a time, but I am going to tell you that I found each one of these types of play is present in people no matter what their economic strata, no matter where they grew up, no matter what country they were born, no matter what sort of family they lived with as children. And the other thing that I discovered was that these types of play have a childhood form, and they also have an adult form. So what that means is that children will role play naturally, but adults who love role play will incorporate it with their adult life. They will go into theater. They will go into a field of work that allows them to continue doing it. Music, children who love music will never stop loving music. It will just change its form as they mature and grow. Collecting things, wrestling, risk-reward play, these sorts of things. Now, the first 5 that you see on the top are big on brain, small on movement. The second 5 are actually kind of equal in that regard between brain and movement. And the final 5 are the very physical types of players. That's low on brain, more on movement, until you get to the very end, which is the least brain and the most physical, which is wrestling. Not going to go into too much more detail about these, but we will have time at the end of the webinar to discuss and ask questions if you're curious about them. I'm going to give you a few examples today of how we use these in instruction. So when I first embarked on creating this webinar, actually, let me just take the temperature of the group for a moment. I'm just going to check the chat window here. Okay, thanks, Hillary. All right, so Hillary's just going to take care of the technical. Great, thank you. I owe you. That's why you're my bestie. If anybody has any issues, just ask Hillary in the chat window for some help. So, looks like we're okay. We're just going to proceed. We'll talk a little bit about what we're missing when we're teaching online as opposed to the classroom. And when I first heard myself say that, okay, what are we missing? I realized it actually isn't what we're missing. Because we're really not missing a whole lot. It's just what's different. We can use everything that we use in the classroom. We just have to change it a little bit. So in the classroom, and many of you are, I'm sure, are instructors, and that's why you attended this webinar. You know that one of the best ways to keep attention on you is to walk around the room. See, again, I faded out so that I wouldn't talk too long. Walking around the room to vary the student's perspective, creating group games and exercises for social learning, and definitely watching student body language for clues on how the content is being received. It's very difficult to do that in a webinar. And having a lot of interaction with the students for questions and discussion, these are absent and online, but we can mitigate that issue. While online, we can vary the student's perspective in other ways, and I just did that a few minutes ago by changing from slide share back to video, and then I'm going to go back to video again shortly. You can use break rooms and the chat function, which we're going to use a little bit later to do a collaborative exercise, and then always set up some time in the middle of your webinar or at the end to invite feedback and questions. What that does is it kind of helps you to take the temperature of the group and how the message is being received. And depending on how often you do that in your session, it will make that much difference. You kind of have to gauge the group that you're working with. How often will they need a break? How heavy is the subject matter? How much are we throwing at them at a given time? And design your intervals based on that. So in this session, you recall the 15 basic types of play that I showed you a minute ago. I've already used one of them, and I'm pretty sure you can guess which one that is. And I'm actually going to open it up to the chat for people to guess which type of play I have already used in this webinar. So just type it. There you go. Cheryl's got it. Storytelling. Excellent. I don't even need to be here. You guys got it. Okay. So yes, storytelling. And that is one of the easiest things you can do in an online instruction. I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling and how to build upon it. Look directly into the webcam when you're doing it. I'm hoping that I did that a minute ago. My eyes do tend to wander because basically I'm just looking at my computer and my kitchen right now. So that takes a lot of discipline to look directly into the webcam. Animate the story with your hands, your face, your tone of voice. Try not to let it get too monotonous. And the rules of every story have a beginning, middle, and an end. Also known as a setting or reality, a problem, and a journey or effort to solve that problem, and then tell them about the outcome. And definitely relate the story to learning content. What that does is it actually allows students to contextualize what you're telling them. It allows them to relate to the characters in your story. And then there's another way to do it, and that is to create a story arc. And a story arc actually goes over multiple webinar experiences, and I'll tell you a little bit about how to do that. So basically, take your subject matter and create a story about a character or characters who are experiencing it. And the story that I told you a while ago about proposal cake and interviewing a client, what that story did is it kind of allowed you to see that moment, that eureka moment that I had 10 years ago when I realized play in the adult classroom can be just as powerful. In fact, more powerful than any kind of lecturing or traditional instruction, because it allows students to experience the content of your teaching. Now, I mentioned story arc. This is the kind of story that you only give pieces of at each learning experience. So let's say you're giving 10 webinars. Take your story, which incorporates your characters and incorporates your subject matter, and stretch that story out over those 10 webinars, and you'll be amazed at how that draws people in. It's all about secrets that you're withholding from one webinar to the next. Information that changes life dramatically for those characters. And you withhold that information and then reveal it at really critical, dramatic moments. What this does is it really draws in your audience so that they can get a sense of how that subject matter is played out in real life. Now, does this remind you of anything? A story arc, withholding information and then revealing that information at critical moments. For me, it reminds me of television. The writer absolutely, Fawn's got it, television series. What they do is they create story arcs that draw you in, and they withhold key information, and then they reveal that information a little bit at a time, just to get people hooked. Just like Game of Thrones does, or soap operas. You just can't resist. You have to get back in there. And that takes a little bit of practice, but eventually you'll get to a point where you can create stories about your subject matter that really grab people. And the way to do that is to think about what grabs you. Why did you go into this area? What really made you passionate about it to begin with? And bring that emotion into it, bring that feeling. Help them to experience with you that moment where you realize, this is what I want to do, whether it's healthcare, whether it's business development, sales, whether it's writing, whether it's whatever it is. Share that moment with your students. about when it really became meaningful for you. So now I'm going to do a little contest. So get your fingers on your keyboard right now and be ready, because this is going to be a little bit of a race. Oops, my bad. I was supposed to click. Everybody's fingers are on their keyboard? All right, the first webinar participant to type the subject matter she teaches into the chat window, I will personally help you craft an original story arc for your online students. Go. Safety culture, is that what that is? Absolutely, Susan, it's you and me. We'll do it. All right, let me write this down. Safety culture. That's a good one, actually. Safety culture, because safety, there's lots of stories about how safety can go wrong. That's going to be fun, Susan. Okay. Now we're going to do another game. Wheel of Fortune. Now, these are two sentences that I provided earlier in the webinar. And the first person to call out a letter, I'm going to reveal that letter. You only get one vowel, by the way. So choose a consonant. Okay, C it is. C, T, S, P. Okay, let's try C. No C's. I think there are some T's. Excellent, good choice. Let's try S. Ooh, lots of S's. P. No P. R. Anybody got it yet? M. Ooh. L. Somebody's got to get it now. I said it earlier, it was on one of the slides. F. Lacey, you're my girl. Well done. Excellent. Okay, let's fill this all out. E, I, well done. Some things are essential to survival. Some things are essential to life. Well done. What am I missing here? N, H, G. Well done. Okay, so some of you might say, might complain, I'm expecting. I can't do that, that's too technically difficult for me. You can do this, I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second. This very exercise, don't complicate it. Don't try to do it too technically savvy. You can just do it like this. Just as easy. It'll just take a few extra minutes for you to write in all the letters, but the effect is the same. But if anyone wants to know how to set up a game like that on a webinar, I can help you do that. It's actually a lot easier than it looks. All right, let's go back to our slides. All right, next. So what kind of play was that? Where's my chat? Why did I lose it? What kind of play was that? Close, structured game. It wasn't so much a structured game, kind of, you got it, puzzle. Okay, so the reason it's not a structured game is that a structured game, people take turns in a structured game. That's more like soccer or Monopoly or poker. A structured game kind of is more like a story in terms of people take turns and it goes sequentially and you have a beginning, middle, and an end. A puzzle is a little bit more simple, where you create a question and people just guess and try until they get it. So good guess. And it was humor as well, because people don't normally see a Wheel of Fortune puzzle in a professional webinar. So it kind of changed the feeling that way. But definitely the core play there was a puzzle. And the nice thing about puzzles is that they're easy to create. You can incorporate your subject matter in them, and people love them because it gives them a sense of achievement when they solve it. And not only that, it engages their brain, which awakens their ability to focus on subject matter. That's why puzzles are extremely useful in online instruction. All right. So I promised that I would talk a little bit about the full day program, of which today's webinar is a snippet. It's available online or in person. Originally, I wasn't offering it online, but since everything has changed with COVID, I've decided to put it online. And plus, this whole thing of discovering how to put play and games into online instruction has allowed me to do it. As I explained earlier, this one-day program is very experiential and experimental. So the instructors actually get together and they create some of the games and exercises that you've seen in this webinar, but also some much more complicated ones that really draw the students in and challenge them to solve problems. Plus, in that session, we learn how to create a subject matter relevant game. Which is something that has a beginning, middle, and end, where students take turns, where what we do is we take everything that a person must do in a particular subject matter, and we make that into the actions that they must take in the game. And what that does is it creates a perfect simulation, a model for students to experience rather than just be told what they need to do. We're also going to, during that one-day program, we look at 8 reasons to use play and games in the adult classroom, and they are detailed in the book that you see to your left on the slide, which is going to be available in ebook format in May. And those 8 things include memory, culture and playfulness, social and collaborative learning, using the hands, creating a sense of higher purpose, definitely the flipped classroom, which was basically made for playing games, the confidence of the playing student, and engaging students on a more personal level through play. All 8 of these things we explore in the ebook, and we look at how to make use of them, how to grow them in your classroom, how to help learning and retention. Memory is one of those things. How to make the best use of their preparations for the flipped classroom and make those discussions and games that you play once you're together much more valuable. This is the kind of thing that you'll find in this book. Now, we are at 2:33 my time right now, so that actually gives us another 30 minutes to engage in discussion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the slides, and we're going to do an exercise, and then we're just going to do some discussion, because I'm sure everybody has lots of questions. We don't have a huge group today, so we're actually going to be able to field those questions. Now, I do want to know, before we go into this exercise, yesterday I sent out an email to all participants with a phrase that you were going to use for the exercise that we were going to do. And I know that not everybody is actually present. So if you recall getting that email, could you type your phrase that you got in that email into the chat window? If you don't recall, if for some reason that email got waylaid, I'm going to give you your phrase right here. Excellent. Are useful in the context not only to amuse and engage. Perfect. Okay, some of you have yours. I'm just going to look at who's present and who's missing. So basically what this collaborative exercise is you have to work together as a group. I'm going to unmute all of you if I can. Let's see here. Unmute. If anybody has some tips on how to unmute everybody at once, I welcome your advice.
I think I've just unmuted myself by clicking myself, Michelle.
You did? Okay, so that means everybody can just unmute on their own. Perfect. So this exercise that I did, everybody has of a sentence. And with the chat, I'm getting a little bit of...
Yeah, I am as well, Michelle. Maybe everyone should mute just so you need them to talk.
Yeah, let's try to do it through the chat. So basically, you'll be looking at the phrases that everyone got in the email and start trying to put them together in a sentence. And this will require all of you to work together. So the first one we had was are useful. Life and are useful in the context, not only to. All right. How about, yeah, this one actually isn't there. She's not here today, so I'm going to add it. This might actually open things up a little bit for us. Try putting that at the beginning of the sentence. I wrote 2 sentences actually. So I figured I wanted to give you plenty to work with in this exercise. Let's see who else isn't here. There's one that I haven't seen yet. I'm going to add it. I've never done this exercise online, by the way, so this is as much an experiment as it is discovery for all of you. Yes, absolutely. If you think you know the whole sentence, then type it here in the chat. Absolutely. That's the interesting thing about play and games is that everything is an experiment and not everything is going to work. One of the things about play that you discover is that playing games amusing and engage students, and in the context of the adult classroom, their work will discover, see, hear, touch. Yeah, actually that's getting close. Play and games are useful not only to amuse and engage students in the adult. Excellent. Okay. Next. Can we do a second sentence? That one, Susan, that was really good. I'm going to see if there's anybody else that might not be present. So you can see how play and games are useful not only to amuse and engage students in the adult classroom. So the very next sentence is going to say something along the lines of it also does ... I think this one might not be, oops, then too. That might really open things up for us. I don't want that to be privately though. Everyone publicly, let's do that. Enable, then two. Excellent. No. Playing games are useful not only to amuse and engage students in the adult classroom, and also allow them to see, hear, touch, and feel Easter bunnies. Excellent. See, there's some play for you. Thank you, Claire. Merci beaucoup. Oh, that's play at its finest. Makes life worth living. All right, I'm going to show you the sentences that I wrote, actually. Just give me a second here. So you can see what that exercise does is it actually gets people typing into the chat. And even if you don't get the final result, you get people thinking about the topic. Play and games in the adult classroom are useful not only to amuse and engage students. Play and games enable them to see, hear, touch, feel, and discover a subject matter in the context of how it will relate to life and their work. So we got pretty close. So that's an example of an experience that you can create in a webinar that engages the students to actually participate. It doesn't have to be successful. It can just be one of those things that draws people in and they give it a try and just experiment. Failure does not have to have the sting that it does for most adults. I mean, if you think about how children play, they don't care about their failures. They just try again. Failure is something that really affects adults in a negative way. We're so afraid of being exposed to ridicule from our peers. We're so afraid of doing something wrong. And yet trying and failing is one of the greatest things that we do in life. It exposes us to so much learning and discovery. And one of the things about play that has taught me is that you don't have to be afraid of failure. It's just a part of the process. All right, now there are a lot of other topics we can discuss today, but what I'd like to do is open the floor. I think we might get an echo if we open everybody at once, so let's try to avoid that. But I would like to open to discussion and questions. We have 20 minutes. So if anything in the slides that you saw or in the stories that I told strikes you as interesting, you want to know more about it, type it into the chat and I will talk a little bit more about that. Or maybe I just covered everything and I should just wrap up right now. Crack open the champagne. Actually, what I could do is I could go back to one of the slides that shows the 15 types of play. What that might do is give us some discussion points. I'm going to go all the way back to the one where they're all showing here. Nope, I went too far. There we go. Okay.
Claire has a question.
Yes.
Which is, how have you integrated play without making the adults feel infantilized? That's a good question, Claire.
That is an excellent question. And yes, that might happen. And for that reason, you do have to choose the play carefully. One of the dynamics in today's session that is kind of interesting is that we're all women. And ironically, women are more open to childlike play than men are. Men are very much all business. They want to know exactly what you can give them that will increase revenues and make them money and make their lives easier from a business perspective. So in that case, you might have to change your vocabulary. You have to choose your play carefully and design it in a way that makes the learning value very obvious. Now, gender does play a big role in how play is received. And storytelling is one of those ones that is very well received by women. It's well received by men as well, but not as much. One of the things that men really like is humor, especially if it's sarcasm, especially if it's really intelligent humor. They also like structured games. It's one of those things where you kind of have to gauge the play preferences in a group. When I did my research, I discovered that everybody has a top three. And if you can get to a top three for a group that is the most likely to be the top 3 for the highest number of people that you have in that group. Zero in on that type of play and try to create some sort of learning experience out of it. If it's music, use that. It might be hip hop. It might be music that really resonates with a group of guys. Dancing is not going to work for everybody. Good example, building. Men love that kind of thing. I have worked in engineering pretty much my entire career, and Hillary, you'll probably agree with me that there are lots of engineers, architects, people in construction who built things as children. And that's why Lego Serious Play came about, because they discovered that adults could go back into that childlike imagination and building things, and that could actually stimulate their creativity. And that's why Lego Serious Play has been successful. So really what you've got to do is you've got to find out what would be most relevant to that audience. Excellent question. And avoid those types of play, like maybe storytelling won't be great for this group. I actually, yes, go ahead.
Can I give an example to Claire?
Absolutely.
From art? Okay. So Claire, Michelle and I delivered training together to a group. It was a group largely of engineers. And what we did was we gave each of them a set of tools on the table, including index cards, tape, Post-its, etc., and everything else that was on the table, fruit, whatever it was. And we asked them to do a little contest to create a machine, basically an engine that did something using what was on the table. And some of the stuff they built was amazing. They loved it because they're engineers. And it was a really successful exercise. So I think, to build on what Michelle said, and for a real life example, that was an example of thinking, okay, who do we have in the audience?
Mm-hmm.
What can we ask them to do that fits with what they loved, probably love to do anyway. So they definitely didn't feel infantilized or like, they were playing. They felt like they were building. So that's just a real life example of something that she and I have done. Sorry, yes. Michelle, thought that would be helpful.
No, that's an excellent example. I hadn't even thought of that. And it's true. You kind of have to gauge your audience. And the funny thing about that group, Hillary, was how they created stories behind their designs. Did you notice that?
Yes, absolutely. It was a great exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, it really kind of opened up their imagination.
So Michelle, we've got another question here, which actually is relevant to me right now because I have a 10-year-old who's going through this with his classroom. They've had some new students start. So Elizabeth Markovitz asks, how do you get students to connect with one another when they've never met in real life? For those of us transitioning from in real life classes to online now, and then maybe fully online in the summer or fall, are there specific tools or games to use at the start versus later on? So in my son's classroom, they've actually had children start virtually, and I have not necessarily seen that's been done too successfully. So that would be a good thing to get your opinion on.
Absolutely. Now, keep in mind, I work only with adults. I have never taught children. And I know it's kind of ironic that we use play a lot with children, but I specialize in teaching adults. Now, in terms of getting them to meet, now, I did that little exercise where I gave you a phrase to start with. First of all, that piqued your interest, made you curious. Okay, what am I going to use this phrase for? And it also required all of us to work together to formulate those sentences. And that was a very quick little exercise that you can do that's pre-webinar. That's one of the things you can do, but you can also pair people up, create groups before. That's the best way to use the flipped classroom, is to create these groups before the webinar experience and let them know this is what's expected of you as a group. Usually one person in the group will take a leadership role. If not, you can pinpoint or you can appoint one of them, and just create sort of a pre-exercise for them to connect. Give them something to do. Don't just tell them you have to know so-and-so before you get to the webinar. because you're going to be in a group. Actually give them something to do before the webinar and have it prepared. That will give them that challenge to reach out to that person and create that relationship so that they can work together successfully. Hopefully that answers your question, Elizabeth. If not, if any of the things that I'm saying today you want to know more about, I am here when you need me. Just give me a call. Send me an email. We can chat online. I have a chat function on the website at Workplace Culture Store, so you can ask further questions if you want. Let's take a look back at the types of play. Is there any slide?
Sorry, it looks like Claire too has shared a link in the chat window.
Yes. Actually, Claire, could you turn your mute off and tell us about it? Why would you share this course? What did it mean to you?
Oh, I shared, and let me open my video.
Okay.
Yeah, I shared a link to a liberating structures. So it's kind of like a micro process that has allowed me to get a room or a course or a training, just kind of get it started pretty softly, just get people knowing each other, get people talking to each other.
Excellent.
And it allows, or the way it works is you have 3 kind of distinct moments, and basically you have a question, for example, what do games mean for you? And then people will talk to each other, and then they'll switch to another person, and then yet again to a third person, and they'll answer the same questions, but their answer will evolve, and it's just a fun way to.
Okay, good, thank you. Anybody have any other questions? Actually, what I'm going to do, if there are no other questions, I have another slide that I added here. That might be useful. This is a model that I use for any group that I help to create a new game. And it might be an instructional game. It might be a strategic planning game. It could be a workplace culture game, any kind of game. These are the questions that I have groups ask themselves. Basically, what kind of game type is going to allow you to create that simulation, that model in which people can discover your subject matter? Who are the players? Why will they play this game? What will they try to get out of it? Decide what the game itself is supposed to do for those players. Is it supposed to teach them? Is it supposed to give them the opportunity to heal, to be inspired? Is it just to engage them in something fun and sort of stress relieving? Is it to provoke thought? And then think about how long the game should take to finish. I've created some games that take 15 minutes and some games that take 2 hours and some games that you play over 6 months. It all depends on what you want to get out of it. How long players will stay interested in playing the game, that's a big one. How long do they have to play to actually achieve the goals that you set out for them? And how much time do we have? If you only have 2 hours in a session, then you kind of have to work around that. And then you create a game space. Is it just a room? Is it an imagined place? Is it a spreadsheet? It could be a park. It could be a field, a whiteboard, a corkboard, lots of different places that you can play out a game. What are the rules? What are the limits and boundaries? And in this case, usually I would ask the group to think about the limits and boundaries in their subject matter. Susan had mentioned safety. Well, the limits and boundaries in safety are risks, unnecessary risks. So in that game, we would create limits and boundaries that mimic the limits and boundaries that you see in that subject matter. What will be the rules for play? What will be consequences if you fail in the game? What are the pitfalls? What are the gains and the losses? And then you have to create situations in which players exercise the freedoms of choice. They collect assets and resources. You have to introduce some randomness, but also some opportunities to make strategic choices, particularly in a game that involves adults. It's got to be far more intelligent. It's got to be more challenging in terms of what you ask the players to make choices about. And then you create steps and processes that you do while taking turns. What are the perils? What are the advancements that you make towards winning in the game? And then you create a theme, you create characters around that. Are you going to use cards? Are you going to use pawns? Pawns represent a player. Are you going to use dice to create randomness? What is the time period? I actually just created a game for proposal managers to explore the topic of managing proposals. So what we've done is most proposals take maybe a month to 6 weeks of preparation. Some are longer, some are shorter, but what we wanted to do was compress that into a game possible time. So we ended up with 15 minutes. So each minute in that 15 minutes represents a longer period of time. So what they do is they make choices within the game that are representative of the choices that they would make in the process of preparing proposals. Does anybody have any questions about this model, or would you like to see anything further on this? On that note, I actually have another item I can show you. Yes, it is a bit detailed, and it just kind of, and the reason it is that a game can be very complicated, especially if you want it to be very challenging and you want it to incorporate a lot of different options for your players. Sometimes developing one game can take months. Sometimes it can take an hour. It depends on what you're trying to go for. I'm actually going to pull up something that Hillary and I worked together on last year. It's something we created to give a few ideas to people doing in-person sessions, but you can actually adapt them really nicely to online learning. True or false exercise. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the slides and I'm going to go to this PDF here. Do you remember doing this, Hillary?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes,
Yeah,
I do.
That's okay. Okay, so what we did was we wanted to, we had a challenge from the community that we're part of with Client Savvy, and they specialize in client experience and helping companies to collect client feedback. And I'm probably not doing them justice right now, but they asked us to create a guide for making a session more interactive. And there's a couple of things in here that were really handy. I noticed that in some sessions, instructors ask a lot of questions, but I also noticed that they tend to do it too long. This is the fourth bullet I'm talking about here. Ask questions of your students, yes, but only until the next interactive exercise. I've noticed that some facilitators just do it too much, and people will start to clam up because they feel like they've been made responsible for too much. And again, here I mentioned, if you use any of these techniques, less is more, definitely only 1 or 2 in a session, because it becomes like a 3-ring circus. Definitely interact. People love to interact. It keeps them engaged. Use puzzles, use challenges, and also invite your participants to challenge you to answer hard questions. In fact, we had created some ideas, Hillary, about dreaming up challenges for your facilitators, solving a math equation, a crossword clue. This is very entertaining for the group, and it actually kind of gives them a sense of power in their experience in the session. There's a few other really good ones here. Opposite play, adding a facetious twist to an exercise. I've done this many times. I'll give you an example. I did an exercise with some engineers that were trying to learn how to be more comfortable and loose with clients. And they would come into the room, we would do these role plays, and each time they'd come into the room and they'd be all nervous and uptight, and I couldn't get them to loosen up and ask those open-ended questions. So I said, you know what, we're gonna try something funny. And I said, next time you come into the room for the role play, I want you to offend the client in any way you possibly can. And their faces just brightened. They were like, wait a minute, you're telling me that failure is the goal? And they realized this would be fun, it would be cathartic, it would allow them to let out some of the frustration they were feeling because they were all introverts and they hated this whole exercise to begin with. So the very next group that came in, one of them farted. I don't know how he did this, but he just kind of held it in and then let it out during the session. It was hilarious. And from that moment on, when people started to laugh and to not take the exercise so seriously, they were able to loosen up. And I think that they learned a great deal more from that, just that little bit of opposite play. One of the things I also encourage is getting hands-on. Now, you might think that's not possible in a webinar, but it actually is. One of the things you can do is you can create origami challenges. Oh, there's a question. Hang on. I've used this to stuff, sorry. Humor has a way of boosting learning. Yes, absolutely. Humor is one of those things that, and you'll notice that preachers will use humor at the beginning of their sermon. And they do this because what laughter does is it opens the heart and the mind to a message. What it does is it sends a signal to the brain saying, this is a safe place. This is a place where there is no threat. And that's why people are laughing. And it really puts people at ease. And they know that they're not going to be judged too harshly for making a joke. They know they're not going to be judged too harshly for having fun or even making a mistake or suggesting something silly. They know that that's all part of the process. It definitely sets them at ease. Humor is very good at that. Okay, Susan's got to leave. Oh, it's 3:02, we're done. All right, so before we go, I'm gonna just bid goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much for attending. And you know where I am if you want to talk further. I love this topic and I'm open to discuss. Everyone have a great day, stay safe, stay healthy, and physical distancing, but not social distancing. Let's stay together in the ways that we can. So thank you everybody for joining. It was fun, and I hope that we will stay connected. All right, bye everybody.
Goodbye.